Sometimes life goes a little off course. That's why you need a podcast host that can go a little off topic. This is the podcast that will give you straight talk about everything life throws at you. Welcome to another episode of Off Topic with Tom Powell. And here he is. This is Tom Powell.
All right.
You all good?
Yeah, I think so.
Right
I do believe.
Well, welcome, man.
Thank you so much. I mean, I can't tell you how much I appreciate being invited to your podcast. I've been listening to them for a while, actually. I followed you on a few different platforms long before, like, I think you kind of caught wind of some of my stuff and started following me on TikTok. So no, I'm thrilled. This is awesome, man. I appreciate it.
I'm very new to your stuff on TikTok.
Right on.
I came across one video. It had to do with behavior of a deer. I found myself fascinated. I watched it a couple of times. I went over to your page. To follow you. I noticed that you were following me, so I hit the follow back button. And I'm still learning about your content. So
right on.
And and listen, don't get too excited about the podcast. Every schmuck nowadays has a podcast. You know what I mean?
I've had a few people ask me about, hey, you ever thought about doing a podcast? And I've given it some thought, but it does feel like there's just a lot of podcasts out there, and there's some good science podcasts already. So I don't know. I'll put it in terms. I've got a concept of a podcast.
There you go.
Right?
Go. You can almost be a podcaster.
Right. Exactly.
I can tell you this, that the volume of podcasters that are out there, the saturation of the market shows you that there is a market, though.
No doubt. No doubt about it.
Ton of people are listening. Ton of people are listening. There's a niche for everything, but
no doubt about it.
As far as what you do, I'm going to be learning as much as the people who listen to my podcast. So can we start with a baseline? You're a PhD in what?
In evolutionary biology with a specialization in animal behavior. So really, I just from being a little kid, I just wanted to know more about why animals do what they do. And that morphed through my education and maturation into a PhD in evolutionary biology, studying animal behavior. So why do animals do what they do? What are the benefits? What are the potential costs? And how can we explain this myriad of behaviors that we see in the animal kingdom?
So then what do you do with such a degree, with such an education? Do you go to work for somebody else? Do you work for yourself? Do you publish studies? What is it that you do?
So someone with a PhD in evolutionary biology could do any and all of the above. I was a professor, so I wanted to go into research as well as teaching. I love to teach, and I think that's something that I try to bring to my online presence, is just my passion for teaching about animals and animal behavior in the world around us. So for me, it dovetailed into a professorship, which then combines with research and teaching. It's just sort of a combined passion. But a lot of folks with degrees in evolutionary biology might go into things like conservation biology. So they're actually boots on the ground doing work out in the field, censusing animals in an effort to better understand how we can live alongside them. What are their needs based on sort of the evolutionary history, that they come from. So there are all sorts of things. One of the nice things about, I think, degrees in STEM is oftentimes the diversity of positions and interests you can satisfy with them. It's one of the things I kind of loved about it.
So where, if you don't mind me asking, because I didn't have this to ask you, but where did you go to school, and then where did you teach?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got my undergrad, my bachelor's in wildlife biology from the University of Montana. And then I went from there to get my PhD at the University of Maryland. And then from there, got my professorship at Gonzaga University here in Spokane, Washington.
Okay, so you were all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. And my PhD at the University of Maryland, my field work was actually done in Australia, in northern New South Wales. So for the first 4 years I was actually in the PhD program, I never saw a fall semester because I was always doing field research in northern New South Wales on this really cool bird. And so I was just taking classes in the spring until my 5th year. I finally took a class in the fall.
Interesting. Montana to Maryland, that must have been a culture shock.
It was. It absolutely was. But I loved it. We lived in Tacoma Park, Maryland, which is right on the DC Maryland border. And I tell you what, Tom, it was so cool being able to walk out the front door. In about 10 minutes, you're at the metro station. In another 15 minutes, I'm on campus at the University of Maryland College Park. But if I went the other way on the metro, 12 minutes, I'd be on the mall, like looking at the Smithsonian, museums and the Capitol building. It was an awesome place to live. Even though I'm kind of a bit of a country boy and I love the mountains and I love the rivers, it was a great place to be for about 6 years. Like, awesome. Loved it.
So you're in the PNW now?
Yeah. I live in Spokane, Washington, and that's my hometown. So I'm actually from Spokane. Yep. Okay, Washington State's my home state.
We're going to touch on that a little bit later.
Cool.
But one thing I noticed in taking a look at your content is a lot of your content focuses on deer.
Just lately. So the last literally 11 TikToks have been about chronic wasting disease, which is a prion-related disease that only affects deer. So it just so happens that the last 11 TikToks are all about deer and this particular chronic wasting disease, and predators of deer and scavengers of deer and how CWD might move around in the environment. But my content really is just animal and evolutionary based. So if you go back a little further, it's all over the place, from the Hoatzin birds of Central and South America to deer.
I'm starting to see those now. I've been going back through some of your stuff, and I'm starting to get into other. I did notice it was the more recent stuff, and I was just curious. Is there a specific area that you specialize in, and was it deer? Obviously, as I've gotten back into your videos, that clearly isn't the case. But is there something that you specialize in, like a specific animal that you specialize in, or is it general animal behavior in large?
Yeah, not a specific animal, but I absolutely consider evolution via sexual selection to be like my bread and butter. And what that means is sexual selection is sort of natural selection's cousin when it comes to evolution. Natural selection favors traits that increase an individual animal's survival and reproduction. Sexual selection drives the evolution of traits that directly increase the likelihood you're going to get a mating, either by making you more attractive to the opposite sex or increasing your competitive advantage to the same sex. So I was fascinated going into graduate school and as an undergrad in bright colors and melodious songs and weapons, right? Like antlers and long teeth that males use to battle with one another. Those are the products of evolution by sexual selection. And so I have always been fascinated by the behaviors and the characteristics that animals use to give themselves an advantage when it comes to mating. So whether that's a beautiful song sung by a song sparrow, or the incredible plumage of a peacock, or the giant antlers of a moose, all of those things that are directly involved in giving you a mating advantage, either through being more attractive or by being more competitive, that's the stuff that I just found crazy fascinating.
And it really does kind of tie into how we find mates.
It really does, right? Like I really enjoy, part of what I loved about studying sexual selection and mate choice is that we can apply it to humans. We have to be a little careful and always recognize that we are different, especially modern humans are very different than other animals, and that we don't have necessarily the same selective pressures, but we are still the products of our evolutionary history. And so we do definitely see these similar sorts of traits and behaviors that evolve in one sex and not so much in the other sex, in humans, as well as, chimpanzees and elk and elephant seals and fruit flies.
Interesting. Now, I saw something on your page about not supporting dolphin exhibits.
Yeah. Okay. I feel pretty strong. Oh, so go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that there are animals that we share the planet with that just shouldn't be kept in captivity unless they have to be there for their own safety because they're injured and can't be released. And dolphins, cetaceans, and that includes killer whales. Orcas are the largest dolphin species on the planet, but they are so highly intelligent. I don't think it can be argued anymore that they're not fully sentient, that they don't have a sense of self. They know who they are in their pod relative to other individuals. And I just cannot condone keeping animals like that. And I would say the same thing of, honestly, chimpanzees and the great apes. Again, unless it's a concert, and there are some great conservation programs that are working on with these animals to make them healthier population-wise in the wild. But unless there is a real compelling reason, like conservation-wise, or we can't release this animal because it's injured and so we have to keep it in captivity, I just don't think we can justify keeping these highly intelligent, highly social animals that have these rich lives in these small pens, especially just for our entertainment.
Well, that was going to lead me to my next question, which is, what is your overall opinion on zoos, and do they serve any purpose? Before you answer, the reason why I ask is because here in the Chicagoland area, we have our large zoo is called Brookfield Zoo. It's the Brookfield Zoological Society.
Yeah.
And they do a lot of conservation work, but I just wanted to get somebody who's actually in the field to give me an opinion on it. Excuse me, but back scratchers come in handy.
No, I love that. I have one just to my right here. No, zoos can serve a crucial purpose in conservation biology, in research, direct research with animals that are difficult to get close to in the wild. So no, there are some fantastic zoos and wonderful people who are doing great research at some zoos, but that's not across the board, right? There are plenty of zoos that are really just exist for entertainment, for the dollars that come in through the front door, and there's not a lot of research being done. A lot of my friends, actually, when I was doing my PhD at the University of Maryland, worked at the National Zoo with researchers at the National Zoo on like golden lion tamarins, these amazing little primates that are highly endangered. And so zoos, especially research zoos, can serve crucial roles in conservation biology. So no, I don't vilify zoos in a general sense. I just think that on a case-by-case basis, we really have to look at how are the animals being treated, what's the purpose of keeping them, and what greater good is the zoo doing, I think.
Okay. Now, my son just dropped something in the next room.
Yeah.
Amateur podcast. That's what you get.
Right. We have wolfhounds. So you may hear a thump outside the door.
Right. I love Irish wolfhounds. Right. They're huge. There's one on the block. These huge, big, beautiful. So going from zoos, then I want it's going to be a touchy subject, but
sure.
I've always had a problem with trophy hunters. Right? Mm-hmm. I don't like trophy hunters. And then you read articles that talk about how people being allowed into certain areas to hunt is actually good for the environment. Is there any merit to that?
There is, but not for trophy hunting. So we are currently, and I'm a lifelong hunter. And actually, for 3 years, when I was at the University of Montana, I have a tendency to take fall semesters off. I don't know why, but I took the fall semester off, and I was actually a professional hunting guide with an outfitter in Granite County, Montana, who I'd hunted with much of my early life. And he called me and said, "Hey, Seth, I heard you're at the University of Montana. I'm down a guide. Do you think you'd want to guide for me for a season?" And I thought about it for about 2 seconds. This is Granite County, Montana, beautiful country, just in the mountains, surrounded by the most amazing wildlife. And I was a pretty passionate hunter at the time. I've definitely aged and matured there. I don't hunt as much as I used to. I still love going hunting with my son. But so I have a long history with hunting. And so when I talk about hunting and sometimes get down on it, I'm talking about it as someone who's always hunted. I'm not like an anti-hunter who's just never experienced that. So to get to your question though, Tom, it's a really important one. Trophy hunting has no role in conservation. It has no role in maintaining the health of, say, deer populations or elk populations. However, we have created a situation in the United States and parts of Canada where there are so many deer now that and so few natural predators, because we've shot them out of there or run them out, that without hunters, the deer populations would swell to the point of disease and starvation. And to some extent, that's kind of like we talked about a minute ago about chronic wasting disease. There's a lot of indication that has a lot to do with an overpopulation of deer, and combined with trophy hunting, because a lot of hunters go out looking for big antlers, and they're not shooting younger, potentially sick, deer out of the population. So we're not really doing the population control that we should be doing by allowing trophy hunting. Trophy hunting simply removes large, mature animals without sort of the added benefit of population control. And these populations of deer in a lot of places now are pretty out of control, given that they have no more natural predators.
So I live in an area that's like that. So in Northern Illinois, we have an absolute ton of deer. And the closer you obviously get to the city, the more you're in the suburban area, so to speak, the less they let you hunt. And every so often, they have events where they bring in hunters and they allow a certain amount of culling of the population to occur.
Sure.
What I was talking about was when they bring in hunters to Africa, when they bring in hunters to some of these reserves, and so the outskirts of these reserves, and you always hear the argument, well, it's for the betterment of the ecosystem there. What we're doing is conserving and not destroying. Is there any merit to that there? I know about the deer culling here because we see it all the time, and the meat gets used if it's solid meat. And you do need to cull the deer around here because it is absolutely off the chain. I wish somebody would cull the goddamn rabbit population. My garden could use it. But no, Africa. Let's talk about like places like Africa.
Yeah, so I don't think that could be justified, at least not on a conservation level. So my understanding, and this is not a type of hunting I've ever done, so this is all based on just my reading of what's happening in populations of quote unquote game animals, target animals in Africa, is that no, going and shooting the biggest greater kudu that you can find, or the largest warthog or leopard or whatever it might be, is not doing diddly squat to actually conserve the species, other than, and I will say, from what I've read, it does bring some money, although this is a pretty contentious issue too, like how much of that money actually trickles down to the people actually living there versus the people who least need it. You could almost argue like the kind of colonizers that own these huge swaths of land that they allow hunting on. So I have heard that the sort of the economic argument is perhaps better than the actual conservation argument when it comes to African trophy hunting. But honestly, I'm not comfortable with either one, but I'm also not involved in that directly. So I don't know, Tom, that's a tough one, but I find it hard to justify trophy hunting in Africa. I just don't see that. I haven't heard a compelling argument that is necessary in contemporary African populations of game animals.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah,
to get an opinion, because I've always looked at, if you're one of these people that has this room with 87 different types of wild animals that you would normally see in a zoo or in National Geographic, stuffed and hung on the walls or something I don't understand the point of it. I don't. It kind of makes my skin crawl a little bit.
Agreed.
And I've hunted as well. I mean, I've hunted rabbit, I've hunted squirrel, I've hunted deer. I'm not a big hunter, and it's not because I'm anti-hunting. If I could paraphrase a famous comedian, it's just that it's really early, it's really cold, and I don't want to fucking go. But then again, I don't like fishing either, right? I love kayaking, but I'm not. I have no desire to ram a hook through a fish's mouth only to throw it back in the water. Right. That's me.
Right. Absolutely. I completely understand that. And, that's one of the things, like when it comes to hunting, like I've never asked anyone in my family to hunt if they didn't want to. If my kids don't want to pull the trigger and end an animal's life, I totally respect that. Now something I have taught them is all gun safety, right? Absolute gun safety. But no, I've never put any pressure on any of my kids or anybody I know to hunt. Our youngest son really loves to hunt with me, and I love going out in the field with him. But I'll be honest, Tom, I spend a lot of the time just looking at the birds and stuff while he's working hard, trying to get that deer.
And gun safety is important, and that's a little off topic. But when I was 14 or 15, my father took me rabbit hunting down in this holler in southern Indiana where I went to high school. And I had never been taught how to handle a gun. I had never been taught how to shoot a gun, other than just like a quick tutorial before we went out in the woods.
Sure.
And I heard my father was trailing me just ever so slightly, and I heard something behind me, and I swung and shot at the same time. And if my father had not grabbed the shotgun and lifted it up, I probably would have killed him in the woods that day.
Oh my gosh, that's terrifying.
So yeah, gun safety for anybody listening that wants to take their kids hunting, a little bit more than here's how you aim and pull the trigger at the tailgate of the truck before you're heading into the damn woods, please.
Absolutely. It's just something you have to commit to. You have to commit to it. Yeah.
Now, this is how new I am to you. You referred to yourself as Seth?
Yeah. So my name's actually Seth Coleman, and I don't hide it on my Chuck Darwin accounts.
Okay.
I just chose Chuck Darwin as sort of an homage to Charles Darwin, right?
Yeah, and I was like,
no,
man,
my name's Seth. Yeah.
I saw that and I was like, I was so interested in the content that I never did any like digging and looking at your bio or none of that. I was just like, I need to get into the content. And I was like, man, dude certainly has the right name for the goddamn field.
Right.
I mean, that's impressive. Chuck Darwin, man.
Chuck Darwin. It would be kind of perfect.
Had a little foresight there.
It would be kind of perfect.
So you don't specify specialize in a specific animal. You jump from animal to animal. You kind of like go on little series of animals. Do you have a specific animal that you really are interested in studying above and beyond all the others?
Well, by far and away, my favorite animal on the planet is the one I got my PhD studying, and that's the satin bowerbird. And it's one of 19 species of bowerbirds. And what makes them so special is, and a lot of folks have seen these without even realizing it, because they've been on Nova specials and nature specials and stuff, and all over TikTok, actually, because they're just so cool. So male bowerbirds build these stick structures on the ground called bowers, and they're just used for courtship. And the bower in the satin bowerbird looks kind of like an avenue of sticks, almost like a bower you would enter into a garden through. An avenue of sticks that he's woven together in the bottom. And then in front of the bower, he clears away all the loose debris and lays down a mat of yellow straw. And then on top of that straw, he decorates with blue flowers and feathers and snail shells. And then females will visit males at their bowers. And bowers are about 100 meters or so apart in the forest, depending on how thick the forest is. Females will visit males at their bowers, and they'll crouch inside the bower while the male does this elaborate song and dance courtship to the female, oftentimes with one of his prized decorations in his beak. So, and males will oftentimes destroy their neighbors' bowers and steal their neighbors' decorations for use at their own bowers. Wow. So, I mean, you just can't help but love these birds. They have so much character and so much personality, and quite honestly remind me a lot of humans, that they're just too much fun to study and talk about.
And where are they found?
So they're found in Australia. So all of the bowerbirds are either in Australia, and southern Indonesia, parts of New Guinea as well. And I think there are 19 species of bowerbird, and each species builds its own unique style of bower, which is pretty cool too.
Is Australia as off the chain as people make it out to be? Everybody talks about the size of the animals, the weirdness of the animals. That is it that kind of that different from everywhere else on the planet?
Totally. Absolutely. It is absolutely unhinged in Australia. And I love the people I met, made great friends. But yes, Australian wildlife is a whole nother bag when it comes to, the animals that have evolved on Earth. And, obviously that's largely due to the fact that Australia broke off so long ago from the rest of the land mass, and animals were free to evolve on their own, independently of all of their counterparts on the greater land mass. And so, yeah, they just have the most absurd animals in Australia. Before we were headed out to Australia for my first field season, I had never heard of land leeches. But they're, and actually I thought that the graduate students who had been out there before were kind of messing with me, like, let's mess with the new guy, tell him about the land leeches, kind of like the ROUSs in Princess Bride or something. I think they're a myth, but then you get there, and on any wet day, you see all these little Australian tiger leeches crawling through the foliage towards you with their little kind of front proboscis up, feeling for body heat and sensing CO2. And it was not uncommon at all to get back to our cabin at the end of a long day in the field, and you take your boot off, and your sock would just be soaked in blood, and you take your sock off, and all of these like black olive-sized leeches that were full of your blood that have been feeding on you all afternoon would just tumble out of your sock. And so, no, land leeches were very much a real thing. Those and paralysis ticks. I honestly thought I was being punked, but no, both of those are very much real. And then, of course, yeah, and the incredible venomous snakes. We had 5 of the top 10 most venomous snakes at our field site. Rarely saw them and never had a problem with them, but they were there. So, yeah, Australian wildlife is absolutely fascinating, but it is kind of off the chain.
No, I wasn't planning on asking you about this, but since we went down kind of the Australia path, I read not too long ago that there was a grouping of islands just northwest-ish of Australia, where there are animals on these islands and animals on these islands that are so incredibly different that there's actually something in the sea where the fish don't even cross. You familiar with what I'm talking about?
I am, and I can't comment on the fish not crossing. What is the name of that line? It's gonna frustrate me because it'll come to me later. But you're absolutely right. There is actually, and it's not it's not an actual line, but we can essentially draw a line between these archipelagos.
Yes.
And the wildlife on either side that evolved there is so incredibly distinct from one another. It's really quite remarkable. And again, has to do, I think, a lot with the time of divergence, or the time of separation of those land masses. And if I remember correctly, the current and the depth of the water between them, I don't remember the specifics as to why that exists, but it really is a thing. It's a real thing. It separates these animals.
It's crazy when they're talking about how you can understand how there are different animals on the land masses, right? Because they got separated and they were isolated, and they never had a chance to intermingle with one another. But the animals in the sea not crossing this path is what really blew my mind. It's like, what is it about the sea that's causing them to know I belong on this side and you belong on that side?
Right, and especially given the fact that, like, the monkeys of the New World, so to speak, the monkeys in Central and South America probably rafted across the Atlantic Ocean. There were no monkeys in Central or South America when the land masses split. Monkeys rafted across. And when I say raft, it's not, they didn't lash together some boards and stuff and like row themselves across, but quite literally they were probably blown on large rafts of debris after storms, blown out to sea. And probably most of them didn't make it. They're rafting events that happen almost day after every single storm. There are animals that get thrown onto debris, and that debris goes out to sea. It's just really interesting to think about that some of the animals that we just sort of take for granted as existing in a place, like monkeys in Central and South America, didn't evolve there because they were there when the land masses split. They rafted across millions and millions of years ago, rafted across. And those that survived were the monkeys that gave rise to all monkeys in Central and South America. Probably many different rafting events too.
That it is insane to think about. It's almost like the movie Ice Age meltdown.
Yeah, truly.
Yeah. It's a scenario like that. Now you study animal behavior, but does that bring you into areas of like studying the animals? Like, one of the things that fascinates me about the Earth, like we all know that everything was together at one point in time, to simplify it for my listeners, and then the land masses split and shifted, and they're continuing to shift, and in a couple of million years it's going to be one big land mass again. But one of the interesting things that I always find, a lot of these things interesting, like I always find like the Hawaiian Islands being the tops of an underwater mountain chain to be interesting, right?
Isn't that awesome?
And that the one that really blows my mind, that a lot of people that I talk to about, I learned don't know about, and that is that the Appalachian Mountains are the oldest mountains on the face of the Earth, and they're the same mountains that are on the west side of Africa, on the west side of Europe, on the east side of, I think it goes up into Canada to a degree, and some part, because it was all one when the Earth separated. So have you ever studied the Appalachian area and the insane diversity? Because I've heard that like scientists don't even know 1/100th of what's actually in Appalachia.
And that's entirely possible. I have to say, I haven't. I don't know much about Appalachian wildlife or the sort of the geologic history of the Appalachian Mountains, other than I did know that amazing fact that these are shared mountains. That at one point, when the land masses were together, the Appalachians were jagged peaks, right? Young, jagged mountains, right? And then over hundreds of millions of years, as the continents drifted apart, they just wore down, right, to the mountains that we're familiar with today. But I'll be honest, I don't know much about the evolutionary history of the animals that are sort of endemic or only found to the Appalachian Mountains.
Okay, now I want
area.
Yeah, totally. You've been touching on a whole bunch of serious stuff, and I don't know, this might be semi-serious or not, but this is actually more the peak curiosity of conspiracy minds out there, and the things that in the Pacific, you are in the prime zone for people who believe where the missing link exists.
Yes.
Okay, so somebody from your expertise, your background, give me your opinion on the validity and the realistic possibility that such a creature exists.
So when you refer to the missing link, you're referring to Sasquatch?
Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti, all the various legends from all of the various continents over time. Specifically in your area, Bigfoot.
Yeah, right. As much as I would love to believe that Bigfoot was or is real, I just don't. I think that there have been too many people in those woods for too many years, hunting, fishing, hiking, camping, even actively looking for Sasquatch, evidence for
Right.
Sasquatch, that by now we would have had solid, even just molecular evidence, right? Hair, feces, a carcass, something. And we just don't have it. And I just can't see a large primate existing in contemporary times, in an area that's just so, even though we have incredible wild lands and wild mountains and wild places in Washington and parts of southern British Columbia, Oregon, there have been too many people out in those woods for too long for us not to have solid evidence that that primate exists or even existed, if that makes sense. Got to go with the evidence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My favorite animal of all time, since I was a wee lad, is the elephant.
Outstanding.
Oddly enough, I grew up to be a Democrat, but nonetheless, the elephant is still my favorite animal. I've loved the elephant for the longest time. To me, it always represented a combination of things. To me, it always represented, at the same time, power, compassion, family, and intelligence.
Absolutely.
Are those traits that we hear about the elephant as we're growing up? Are those traits true? Are they the animals that feel the pain, that never forget? Are they the animals that are, you talk about finding carcasses, damn near impossible to find? Is all of this true? Tell me something about my favorite animal.
Yeah, in a nutshell, yes, it's all true. Elephants are remarkable creatures. They're another animal that I don't think we should be keeping in zoos. Again, unless it's for valid conservation reasons, or that they can't be released into the wild for some reason. But yes, everything you love and you think you know about elephants is, well, I shouldn't say everything because I don't know everything you know, but most of what you just said is true of elephants. They are remarkable creatures. They have such rich social lives. They are so deeply endowed with this sense of sentience, this sense of self. They know who they are in their herds relative to other individuals. They interact with their dead in a way that no other animal that we have observed interacts with their dead. Even skeletons that are unknown to the particular elephant herd will be visited and interacted with. I don't know if you heard about the absolute amazing finds just in the last couple of years. Indian elephants in India have been observed burying dead calves. And I mean burying them. They carry them for miles. This has been observed 5 times. And what's happening is when these calves die, and they're all young calves, they are carried by the group to, sometimes for miles, to these not palm plantations. It's a different type of plantation where irrigation ditches have been dug to provide water for whatever it is they're growing. It might be palm. And these elephants are carrying their calves to these ditches that just so happen to be just about the right size to lay a baby elephant on its back and cover it. And in each of these, I mean, it blows my mind. I actually get chills thinking about it. I made a TikTok about it a while ago. There's some really cool papers out that are free to read for anybody who's interested in reading them. These elephants are burying their calves gently. They settle them down into place. They move dirt over them. And then the entire herd just trumpets, just turns their trunks to the sky and trumpets. And as though the same way we would at a ceremony honoring our dead when we're mourning the passage, especially of a baby, right? And then they avoid that place. Like, they don't actually revisit that place. Even if it's on one of their migratory routes, they will go miles out of their way to avoid that spot where they buried that calf. So there is something deep and rich going on there. And we are just starting to scratch the surface of what that might be. But I remember first hearing about that earlier this year, actually, and just getting chills thinking about elephants burying their dead. We'd always known that they interact with their dead in a way that seemed very special and very deep. But this is a whole different level to carry. And these baby elephants, they're not disease ridden. So this isn't a contagion thing. which would still be interesting, right? If they're kind of moving them away from their migratory routes, knowing that they might get sick if they interact with them too much. But they're carrying them sometimes for miles to these specific places where they then bury them and then trumpet. It blows my mind.
So that's a ceremony, so to speak, that's very similar to human beings. So then what about the apes who are very close to us, the chimpanzees and whatnot? How do they handle their dead?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So there doesn't seem to be a universal way that the great apes handle their dead. It seems to be on a very individual basis. So some, like in chimpanzees, for example, males will oftentimes completely ignore like dead baby chimps as long as they're in their own troop. Sadly and grotesquely, when chimps are very warlike, they tend to be very aggressive territorially. And so males will oftentimes, kill the babies of rival troops. But within a troop, males oftentimes kind of ignore dead babies. They'll come and interact with them a little bit, but the mothers are known for oftentimes going into what looks like to us, hard to call it anything but mourning, where they cradle that dead baby, where they try to interact with it, where they, for at least a day or two, they try to get it to wake up, to play with them, to interact with them. And they'll carry it sometimes to the point where the baby is, not to get too grotesque, but where the baby's decomposing and they don't know, it almost feels like they don't know how to let go of that dead baby, which I feel like is just such a human experience too. I haven't been through it and I hate the thought of it, but I, from what I've seen and read and sort of talked with people who have lost children, it just feels like we're seeing something similar to that on the level of like mourning the passage of this baby.
Okay. I'm going to switch gears completely. I understand what you're saying about the Sasquatch missing link. There's been too many people. It's on land.
Yeah.
You haven't found anything. How is it possible that a fish like the coelacanth could go undetected for as long as it did?
I think it just speaks to how absolutely massive the ocean is. And
coelacanth just boils down to that.
I really do. Yeah. And they're at depth. The coelacanth tend to be, unless they're sick or have been pulled up in trawlers or something, they're pretty deep. And so they're not fish we would see at the surface, even when we're out and about on the ocean. But honestly, I think that it speaks to just the absolute sheer volume of the ocean. And I can only imagine, the ocean, I think, Tom, is where the last truly undiscovered big species, like mega species, are. And I don't mean mega like, there's a megalodon out there to discover, but I mean like there are large animals that we don't, I think, have a good understanding of their even existence in the ocean. It is that big. It is that vast and unexplored.
I was literally just going to ask you, do you believe a megalodon could possibly exist? Because that, without any knowledge whatsoever or expertise or education, that's one thing I'm like, that could really be real, couldn't it?
I don't think so, only because of the sheer size of the megalodon, maybe the size of the prey it would be eating. Kind of like when we pull up giant squid, we see evidence that they've been battling with sperm whales, right? Or when a big old bull sperm whale washes up on the shore, we see these huge sucker mark scars on its face from it battling with these giant squid. Which honestly, by the way, how cool is that to think about, like a 45-foot long, 60-ton bull sperm whale doing battle with an 80-foot long giant squid, and then the body of the giant squid might only be 25, 30 feet maybe, but its long grasping tentacles could be up to 80 feet long. Imagine those two monsters doing battle like 3,000 feet under the surface of the ocean in the pitch blackness, right? That's just awesome. I love that thought.
King Kong and Mothra.
Right. Seriously, there are monsters down there,
Something out of Monarch.
Yeah. So I think that if there were such thing as a megalodon, something that large, again, kind of like the Sasquatch, even though the ocean is so vast, it's definitely more plausible in the ocean than it is in like the Cascades. I think we would have seen at least some evidence of such a large creature existing alongside us for so long, either washing up on the shore, or would have seen evidence of injuries to like maybe whales that it was biting, something just to give us an idea that there's a shark out there a lot bigger than the great white, for example, But I'd love the thought that it exists, and I'm not 100% sure, obviously. But I think, again, we probably would have seen some evidence for it by now, a creature that large.
People want these things to be real, right? They want the Bigfoot to be real. They want Loch Ness, Chupacabra. Right. They want all of these things to be real because, if they could be the one that saw it, that spotted it, then, they could catch their 15 minutes of fame as well.
Right. And it's fun and exciting to try to ascribe something really exciting to the unexplainable or the unexplained, some grainy footage. It's I think that's a mythical creature, when in fact it's just not.
All right. Tell me that what we're doing is not a bad thing. So my wife and I, we feed the birds. We've got multiple bird feeders, and we have multiple dishes, and we have multiple bird houses and baths. And we the birds occupy the houses, and we have these tiny little birds, and then we have cardinals, and we have blue jays, and we have some doves. Is that should we do we make them dependent and then thus make it harder for them to survive in the winter, or is that something that's okay?
Yeah. So a few things about that. I feed the birds too. But if you're going to feed birds, you just need to be kind of diligent about it and considerate. Recognize a few things. You want to make sure you don't let your bird feeders get fouled, get dirty. You want to make sure you clean them, because bird feeders can be one of the primary sources for some avian diseases if they're not clean, right? If they end up getting feces, in their food, that can end up being a source for some avian diseases. And then other things like right about now, for the last month, I pulled my bird feeders in because the birds that need to migrate the heck out of here for winter go south. If they're getting all their needs met in my backyard, that can quite literally delay their migration. So they'll respond obviously to things like shorter day length and stuff, and that really is what cues them into it's time to go, it's time to move south because the winter is coming. But if they're getting a ton of great food, high calorie food, lots of protein, lots of fat, lots of carbohydrates, that can delay their migration. So I'll usually pull my feeders in for the month right around October, so that those birds kind of recognize okay, not only is the day getting shorter, but now I'm kind of hungry. If I start flying south, I'll find the seeds, I'll find the insects, and we're all good. And then once the migrants are gone, I'll put my feeders back out for the winter, just so the birds I love in my backyard don't have such a tough time of it.
So are the blue jays and cardinals migratory birds then?
Where you are. So we don't have blue jays or cardinals here in Eastern Washington. I'm trying to think. You said you're in Illinois?
Chicagoland, yes.
Chicagoland, yeah. So my guess, and this is just off the top of my head, I'm betting you have some resident populations that stick around and do make use of backyard feeders, and that probably is actually a really important source of food for them through the winter. But I also think I know, and I could be wrong, I think I know they do actually have somewhat of a southerly migration to slightly more temperate climates in the winter. But a lot of species do that. A lot of bird species we see have little resident populations, even if the vast majority of their species flies south for the winter, from Canada geese to song sparrows.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So no, feeding birds is a great thing. You just want to do it, responsibly and just with just recognizing there are right times to do it, and make sure your feeders are kept clean.
Yes. My wife is diligent about keeping the feeders clean. I can tell you that. I got to tell you, this has been absolutely fascinating. I'm digging on your content. Like I said, I'm extremely new to your page. I'm going to be doing a lot more digging into it. I do want to ask you, how's TikTok changed your life in any way, shape, or form, if it has?
Honestly, it's allowed me to really lean into my passion for teaching about science and nature and animals. I love to teach, but obviously when you're teaching, you have a curriculum, or at least certain lessons I'm trying to get through, concepts that I need to talk about, whether I'm teaching cell bio or molecular bio or evolution. But on TikTok and social media, being a science creator, I'm free to talk about whatever it just piques my interest. Or especially if you look at my content, most of my TikToks are me answering people's questions. I love it when people ask questions, because oftentimes it gets me into talking about an animal I may not know much about, or sometimes it's one right in my wheelhouse and I can just get super excited about it and say, I know a lot about that animal, you know? So I think that honestly is what TikTok has given me, is just this ability to just lean into my passion for talking about animals and animal behavior, for sure.
Yeah, well, like I said, your content caught me. I go back to the days when we used to wait until midnight and 11 p.m. and Marty Stauffer's Wild America would come.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he would have a different animal in each episode, and we'd sit there and we'd watch Marty Stauffer, and then we were so old that the TV went static until whatever 5 a.m. or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I always loved the whole the animal. I loved going to zoos. Like I said, spent a lot of time, a lot of years of my life outdoors. So coming across your channel has been an absolute joy.
Thank you so much.
Can you tell everybody that's listening, not just on TikTok, but where can they find you everywhere?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. On TikTok and YouTube, I'm just Chuck Darwin, just all one word, Chuck Darwin. And on Instagram, I'm Chuck Darwin Science, because somebody already had Chuck Darwin. So yeah, I'm Chuck Darwin on TikTok and YouTube, Chuck Darwin Science on Instagram.
Well, I absolutely dig the content. Please don't stop doing what you're doing. I'm always mesmerized when guys like you with the PhDs on the wall follow a guy like me. I
love your content. I know we didn't get a chance to talk politics, and that's not what this particular hour was for, but I dig your content. You and I are kindred spirits when it comes to that stuff. And I love the guitar on your wall. My buddy and I actually caught a ton of dead shows back when we were like 19, 20, and 21.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I do appreciate that. That's awesome. That's spectacular. I'm honored that you follow me.
Yeah, and, absolutely.
Hopefully we could do more collaborations in the future.
That'd be great. Yeah, be my pleasure for sure, Tom.
Definitely. And if I'm ever in the Pacific Northwest, I will be looking you up.
Please do. And
if you're ever in Chicago, you got to let me know so I can take you down to my daughter's college campus, UIC, and get you one of the classic Chicago Italian beefs.
Oh my gosh, I'd love that. Yeah, and count me in.
You could see Northern Illinois animal behavior in the form of human animal behavior in Chicago.
Hey, humans are fascinating. So yeah, I'm in.
They can be. Hey, listen, man, thank you very much for doing this, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. Really, my pleasure.
Take it easy, brother.
Take care of yourself. Bye-bye. Bye.